Thank you very much. I'm always nervous when I get given a panel and I see I'm on that kind of last slot. And I think, oh, really, they don't think I'm that important. But the difference this time is the topic is incredibly important. The panelists are excellent. I'm really excited about every single person on this panel. And I'm not going to give it too much preamble. Just we're going to get right into it because, again, time. AI is clearly a topic on everyone's mind. Where obviously I'm a journalist. I'm at Semafor, and we have employed some AI in some of our work to experiment with it. But clearly, across industries, across sectors, everyone's thinking about how this technology will change their industry or change their sector or change their economies. And in the case of Africa, this is really, could be seen as a huge opportunity. But as was just said, there are risks too, and this is what we're going to get into with the panel. And I'm just going to start out with a sort of a big picture sort of question to you all, which is to really just talk a little bit about, in as short as you can, because we're going to get into details as we go along. But what you see as the opportunity for Africa's economies with AI. I'll start with you, Hardy, just to give us a sort of your first big overview.
I think there's always a danger of sitting in the middle.
Yeah, I caught your eye, sorry.
Look, I mean, it's a $1.5 trillion opportunity that we're talking about. Africa's GDP is 3.1, $3.2 trillion. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. But it's an opportunity. It's not gainsaid that we will realize the opportunity if we don't put our best foot forward. And I think that for me is what we all have to work on, is how do we take advantage of what is clearly an opportunity for Africa to have a seat at the table, and as somebody said, to not be on the menu, this time round. It's absolutely critical for the continent. And, for us at Cassava Technologies, it's really about ensuring that we're accelerating the building of digital infrastructure that underpins what AI would bring to the continent. It's about ensuring that we are doing the digital upskilling that's needed. Working with partners like Google, it's also about making sure that we're driving down the cost of access, whether it's the cost of access to devices, is the cost of access to that, digital infrastructure. So that's what it means.
Yeah. Adaora, your kind of overview, what do you think the opportunities are?
I definitely would echo everything Hardy has said. I think for us, when you look at AI, we've always been a company that's grounded in AI. And we see with Africa, it is an inflection point. The opportunities to innovate and to leapfrog using this technology are boundless. It doesn't matter what field you're talking about. It could be agriculture, it could be education, it could be health, it could be, development, anything, social impact. But what we're looking at, like Harry said, is the underpinning, the foundation that will allow the continent as a whole to actually take advantage of this technology. The talent it abounds. What we need and what we're looking at is the infrastructure, the ability to provide the necessary electricity, connectivity, and to educate and upskill the population. That task force that is provided, that is actually intentionally being trained for jobs for the future.
Alex, I'll come to you, just to the sort of the Google vision on this in particular, because you guys have done so much in and around the space. Talk a little bit about the Africa vision.
Look, I think the power of AI is that it's transformative, right? When you think about the opportunity that this AI revolution is the one time that we have an opportunity as Africa to really leapfrog in a lot of ways and be able to solve some of the societal challenges that we have.
Right.
And then be able to sort of fuel innovation, right? So for me, it's just one of those things that excites me, being someone that's in the space. I think from a Google perspective, we've been an AI company for some time now. I think we've always spoken to that. Our products on the continent, whether it's Maps or Mail or whatever, YouTube is always empowered by AI. But I think that what excites me is actually, what we've done, especially on the research side of things, on AI research. We set up our AI Research Center in Accra back in 2018.
Yep.
And a lot of the work that we do from this research center is really trying to, how do we solve for the basic challenges that we have on the continent, right? So whether it's food security, for instance, trying to figure out how do we help farmers understand how to be able to get real-time information on how to get to market, to understand, how to predict weather conditions that can affect their harvest. That's really important. When it comes to health, for instance, we do a lot of work. What people don't understand is the impact that maternal health, just the devastating numbers, up to 800 women die every single day on our continent because they could avoid things that, from a maternal health perspective, that they could actually avoid if they actually knew what was going on. And that is because of the cost of ultrasound machinery, for instance, right? Ultrasound equipment. We're now working with, for instance, Jacaranda Health in Kenya to have point of care, cost-effective, handheld ultrasound predictive, equipment that really can help reduce that in a long way. For me, that's also really important. When it comes to planning, how do we plan for electricity, which is going to power AI? We're doing work where we have this open buildings data set that really uses satellite imagery along with a whole bunch of data to help governments really plan how to be able to get infrastructure and electricity into their communities. We're doing that across Uganda and Kenya. So for me, beyond, we're not even going to talk about innovations yet, but for me, I think there are, 2 ways to be able to solve for the challenges we have. You have to address the immediate needs, food, climate, health, and then, of course, that sets us up for the innovations that we're also seeing being built on top of that. So it's just exciting times, and I think that oftentimes when I talk about the advantages of AI, clearly there are risks of AI, but I think the advantages far outweigh the risks that we see in the immediate future.
Karim, as Alex says, it's an exciting time, but everyone here is pretty clear-eyed that there are just some fundamentals that need to be in place before we even get into the so-called exciting sort of bit. But you've been doing a lot of exciting work already as an AI company. Can you talk a bit about overcoming some of those challenges, especially at the start of your company, but also how you see that training opportunity, that in sort of extending those skills to more people?
Absolutely. I think AI is the biggest opportunity we have in Africa by far. It's much bigger than the internet. I was saying this a few years ago, and people were like, yeah, but the internet is quite big. Now there's less debate about that point,
right.
Or the 15 trillion of economic value that AI will bring by 2030. And the key question is how does this empower young entrepreneurs, young talents over the continent? For me, that's the key question. I grew up in North Africa. I worked then in the States. I graduated in the States and worked there, in London as well. And then I decided to come back to Africa to co-found my company, InstaDeep, in North Africa as a bootstrap, because I was convinced that people were not fully appreciating the potential of young African talents. And the bet was you know what? We can do deep tech innovation. We can do AI as well as anybody else, as well as Silicon Valley, DeepMind in London, Asia. And incredibly, this sort of vision turned out to be true. InstaDeep today is one of the largest players. It's the largest AI acquisition outside the US, bigger even than DeepMind, which was not something we expected day one. And across this journey, really the key things for me are empowering talent. So it's very simple things, such as, for example, making sure you can bring top-notch like senior managers from elsewhere to sort of help educate the next generation of AI talent. It sounds very simple, but like if we want to hire a top talent from Silicon Valley in Africa, it's complicated. In Tunisia, for example, you have only 5 maximum foreigners that you can employ. And so unlocking the potential is key. Same thing on building up like talent pools. We have offices in Tunis, in Lagos, Nigeria, in Cape Town. Yet, if I have somebody who's exceptional, who's coming from Mali, it's going to be super hard to have that person join our offices simply because of visas. But I can see some progress on the ground, in particular in Rwanda, with President Kagame announcing that any young African that comes by plane is welcome to work in Rwanda. We're now assembling the first dream team of AI talent. That sounds like a detail.
They have to come by plane.
Controversial. But
Yes.
They have to come by plane.
It's by plane. It's by plane.
They got to come by plane.
It's by plane, but still, that's already amazing. And so this means that companies like us can, for the first time, really offer opportunities for people all across the continent. So really unlocking these really like outdated barriers, especially for like top talent in tech, is critical. Allowing, as I said, senior people to join.
to pass on.
This would already go a long way into creating the right infrastructure to develop entrepreneurship further.
And tell me a little bit about how, I'll come to you again, Hadi, about this issue of training talent, of really taking advantage of what the technology can do. You and I were talking earlier, you talked about examples in the healthcare sector and people passing on talent even when they've left the countries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, I mean, a lot of the times people ask me, what is Africa's biggest challenge? And you can itemize them, right? There are as many, the lists are as many as the people that are in the room. Right. But I actually think that the biggest challenge that we have on the continent today is unemployment.
Yes.
If we don't fix youth unemployment, it's really means we haven't fixed sustainability. And AI is perhaps our best opportunity to fix youth unemployment on the continent. By some statistics, there are 4 million vacancies in cybersecurity.
Yes.
And if you think about just how we could get access to training for young people into becoming cybersecurity specialists using AI, it now means that they can do self-paced education, they can do certification. There is things that we're working with Google.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of a sudden, we are starting to make a dent on. So it's really not just about, upskilling just for the sake of upskilling. It's really recognizing that the AI opportunity is in Africa providing the skills that are missing in the places where they are needed without having to jump on a plane. So that's one part. The second part is, if you look at the challenges that we've had in the healthcare sector in Africa, and just the number of doctors and nurses that have left the continent, whether to come here, to go to the US, to go to, to other parts of the world. And the training that is now lacking, because a lot of the training for healthcare workers is on-the-job training.
Yes.
For nurses, for doctors. And what AI now provides is an opportunity for a young medical doctor that qualified in Ghana but has now come to the UK, is working in, perhaps a world-class hospital in one of the more developed countries, to be able to get onto a platform, record a course for, for nurses, for, pediatric doctors, and be able to speak in a language that they understand. And so you've got this person, yes, they're sitting in a hospital in the UK, so they understand what's needed from a world-class perspective, but they're very much aware of the challenges that the person that they're training or that they're recording the training for in the environment where they themselves, came from. So, I think the democratization of expertise is one of the things that AI resolves as far as the intractable societal challenges that Africa is faced with today.
Are you seeing similar sort of opportunities in your field, Adaora?
I think that is the premise under which we have always thought AI should be available anyway. When you look at our open source position, all our large language models have always been open source. And what we see is people using these LLMs to do exactly what Hardy is talking about. It was interesting listening to Eden talking about business outsourcing. And there is actually a Kenyan company that has built an AI model that matches employers with exactly what you do, but in the field of AI. And it's built on that open source model. It speaks to what Hardy is talking about the democratization of access. You have to have, it's not just an investment issue. It is also the recognition that the underpinning of societal development and the infrastructure of getting a critical mass of educated people in the country and getting the critical mass of economic activity has to be supported by governments to a certain extent. It has to be strengthened by the policies, and then people have to be given the opportunity. So when you look at things like which is why we're very, very, very strong on open source. When you look at the opportunities that giving an LLM like Llama gives for government tooling, even to take Llama and rebuild your entire healthcare data system, or take Llama and rebuild your technical and vocational educational curriculum. These are the things that we see. We're seeing them at a smaller level with companies like Karim's, but we're also seeing the interest from government to be able to say, okay, how do we take this and rebuild the fundamental public service and infrastructure as well?
Yeah, it's a real opportunity there. And I do want to come back to you in a minute on policy, but I thought, Karim, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about the innovation part of it, right? Like how we enable innovation, because you're the best example of what can happen on the continent, right? So it'll be interesting to hear from you what you think, the obstacles you saw, you overcame, and how you see other startups perhaps matching
Absolutely.
your success.
It's a very interesting question, Yinka, because if you look at like AI innovation in the world, it's driven by different actors depending on the region. So obviously in the US, we have innovation driven by the tech giants, Meta, Google, and others. In Asia, the drive is really coming from governments who have very strong policies in favor of innovation in AI, like for example, China. Europe, innovation is more around like the regulatory side, preserving privacy. There's been a lot of talk about recent measures about data ownership and others. But if you look at like what's the superpower of Africa for innovation, I am convinced that it's actually startups and communities. We have an unusually very strong community, for example, in machine learning and AI. This is one of the things that's remarkable about Africa. The top AI researchers meet every year, share ideas, etc., which was a booster for us. We met many colleagues from Google at those events and Meta as well. So that's the community side. And the other is startups. And so what we need is an environment that allows startups to thrive. Today, money is not a problem in Africa. Like funding for startups is available. We need the right incentives from governments. For example, Tunisia, through the Startup Act, which was a package of measures helping young startups grow, was super helpful. We know we went through that process in the early days. And so really creating an environment where fundamentally a young talent in Africa sees the potential, and of course we need success stories, but sees the potential and is like, you know what, actually creating my startup and building in Africa is a better path than going to just get a corporate job in Europe or the US. And I do generally believe this is possible. Data, not a limitation. The real world is full of data. Financing, not a limitation. Talent, we touched on that point, on the measures that need to be taken. And finally, the point which is critical, and I totally agree with Alex and everybody who's been speaking about that, is really we need infrastructure. The area, I think the real gap in machine learning and AI in Africa is about infrastructure. It is in many ways extremely compute hungry. We have potentially the energy sources, but we don't have the compute infrastructure. And that's the real gap we need to overcome in coming years.
Right. And come back to you, Alex, in terms of that infrastructure opportunity. I mean, Google has done a lot of work in this space.
Yeah.
I mean, where is the focus now in terms of the things you really see a lot more of the energy going towards, because particularly with AI, obviously.
Look, I mean, I think, the point about infrastructure, I think, is critical because the compute power. I mean, I think when people say AI, everyone gets like AI. It's like this thing. It's kind of like aggregated intelligence. Let's take out the artificial so it doesn't sound so mystical. All it is being able to have much more data that you can process to be able to solve a problem. That's what it is, right? But that does require a lot of compute power.
Right.
And I think that, one of the things that we've been doing in partnerships with Liquid and Cassava, et cetera, has been really about how do we invest in that? So of course we invested in our Equiano undersea cable, which created a lot more capacity for data flows on the continent. Because again, to be able to bridge this divide that we're talking about, the cost of data, more people have to get on. We talked about the young people that Africa has, and Hardy alluded to it. By 2030, again, 2030 is just a few years ago, a third of the world's global youth population will be from this continent. That's actually scary if we don't leverage the power of AI to be able to create opportunities for them and be able to get them online. Now, to get them online means that they have access. So for us, we've invested in Equiano, and it's great. Again, this is not to tout what we're doing, but I really get excited about the investments that we're making. We just invested in Umoja, which is a terrestrial cable that's connecting from Kenya through DRC, Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa into Australia. That's the first one, right? And it's going to create more redundancies as well in partnership with, Equiano, for us to kind of create that capacity. But then the next level, as we talked about, is once you have this capacity, you also need partners to be able to now do the last mile connectivity to create the bandwidth that you need, which is a huge opportunity for businesses, right? So that's the other thing that I think is now critical. How do you make sure that we get that to work? But of course, as mentioned earlier, it does require partnerships with government to be able to create the frameworks that makes this AI, revolution something that we can grasp. And that's been working with regulators to understand AI, so it's not, some mystical thing, but also to have frameworks in place that enables. Again, it should be risk-based. Don't get me wrong. It shouldn't be just let's just do it. It should still, but it should be, the risk should really correlate with the opportunity and not just let's sort of stifle AI. There's opportunities that we have to be able to continue to work, and the work that Adaora does and the work that our team does in terms of being able to make sure that we work with the regulators in a way that's a partnership to say, how do we frame this so that we don't just copy what we see everywhere else and stifle the opportunity we have. On the continent, based on every research, we are more open to AI than any other region in the world. And I think that's a great thing. But coupled with that means that we now need to make sure that we have the right frameworks in place. So that's why we're excited about the African Union being really excited, working with them to be able to create this framework. We're excited about countries like Rwanda, being able to already have a framework for AI that I think is again, these are good examples for other countries to follow. But it's work that all of us have to do. It's not just Google's work. It's not just Meta's work.
Right.
It's not just, Liquid's work. It's everyone's work in terms of how do we all collectively work together in the most progressive way to make sure that we seize this opportunity. This is the biggest opportunity that we have as Africa. We've got to mitigate the risk, but we have to be able to make sure that we grasp the opportunity around it. So for me, it's really fourfold. It's about how do you invest in infrastructure? How do you scale the people that you have on the ground? And that comes with a whole bunch of initiatives. We do that, but it also requires that we change the framework for our educational systems. There has to be a lot more ICT education, a lot more STEM education, so that people understand how to actually take advantage of this. Then you have to, of course, fuel the startup economy. Like, how do you do that? Yes, there's definitely money, but how do you make sure that you have an enabling environment where they can thrive? And last and foremost, and I just talked about, is that partnership to create a framework with government, the regulations that are going to govern, but also help us accelerate the growth opportunities.
That's a great way to segue into Adaora to talk a little bit about your experience in sort of public policy work working with governments, in particular in Nigeria. You've done some work with the helping with the AI policy there. Love to hear how that came about, what kind of lessons are learned, and what might be applied elsewhere.
So one of the things I'm particularly thrilled about in Africa is that every single country has taken that has started to look at AI as a tool for development is taking a very intentional approach to it. Rwanda was always the outlier. Everybody's kind of falling behind. Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia. They all have AI strategies in some form or another at the moment. One of the things that was particularly interesting in Nigeria was that, first of all, they used an LLM to actually find Nigerian academics, Nigerian engineers, Nigerian developers, and rate them not only by their professional skills, but even by the standards of the publications that they had been published in, and brought over 150 of them together with companies like Google, Meta, Microsoft, companies that have had a long history in the infrastructure and the regulatory space, brought together lawyers that were working around AI policy, and basically put us all in a room for a whole week to design the strategy for Nigeria. And you had everything, conversations around safety to what exactly does the country need for infrastructure. And out of that has come the special purpose vehicle that is now looking to raise money, a collaboration between government and private sector to build over 90,000 kilometers of fiber across Nigeria. We have, both of us have cables that land in Nigeria. How does this new initiative find a way to leverage those cables? It's ridiculous. In Nigeria, you have all 7 cables that land in Nigeria land in Lagos. Our cable is the only one that lands outside Lagos. But you have the entire country that needs to be opened up, like you said. What are the intersections? What are the policy levers that need to be raised and driven to be able to have a holistic approach? How do you actually get access to GPUs? For the volume that you need to start modeling, how do you actually get the access to those? When you're looking at redesigning your curriculum, you're talking about skilling and upskilling. What exactly do you need? What are the levers of your educational skills, infrastructure that you need to change? So that was, and that was, for me, an extremely heartwarming experience, to sit down with over 150 people over 5 days, literally, and break down every single aspect, and taking it from a very Nigeria-specific perspective. So when you're talking about issues of responsible AI and how you're going to tool and making sure that you incorporate, there's no bias in it, that human rights are still respected, you have a very interesting conversation about what are African values, what are Nigerian values, how do you put in the checks and balances to make sure that people are not excluded? What is the benchmark for things like that? When you're doing your monitoring and your evaluation of the AI systems that are being delivered, developed rather, what is the benchmark for this? When you're doing your regulatory oversight, what exactly are you looking at in terms of not just physical capacity but technical knowledge as well? So that was and I hope that we will see the same sort of thing. The AU is currently doing a series of consultations across the continent. We're hoping that we will see a lot more integration with countrywide policies with this continent-wide strategy, so that there is an understanding across the entire continent that these are the benchmarks, these are the barest minimum for everybody. And then every single country can build on that, and the collaboration can start.
No, that's fantastic. Karim, from the startup, you're no longer a startup, but you know what I mean, from the smaller company point of view, navigating their way through, particularly if you're trying to be a Pan-African company, navigating their way through regulatory frameworks in different countries. What kind of things are you hoping you'll see as, when policies like this sounds very impressive. They've all sat down, they pulled this together. Rwanda's doing some very impressive things, as you said, and so on and so forth. What kind of, concerns and opportunities you see when you think about what governments might come up with, which might make life easier or
absolutely. I'm glad, Adaora, you've done this kind of sessions in Nigeria, because we definitely need to communicate with governments. Except a few of them, many of them are still very far in their thinking and in their strategy from understanding what is really going on in AI. Like, we're talking about GPUs, and it's an infrastructure conversation today, but in the future, this will be about sovereignty. This will be about national security. We're not at that kind of thinking. We're going to get there, but if we could explain it, and it's really important to do these things, that would go a long way. Now, when I look at the state of things in Africa, I'm extraordinarily optimistic, because really, the tools we have are incredible. Something that we don't talk a lot these days, but on a single smartphone, even without internet, you can have all the world's knowledge compressed in an LLM, accessible without even internet. Think about how much this could bring to a young talent in terms of learning potential. We discussed healthcare also. So for me, unleashing the creative forces and generating value in Africa by young African talents is definitely possible. And ideally, governments are acting sort of as a supporter, but really innovation initiative is driven by the private sector, and governments are dealing with fundamental policy and regulation about AI and creating sort of a playing field. But really, in our thinking, governments should not be driving AI's economic development on the continent. It should be startups, it should be private companies, and I hope the tech giants continue to invest in Africa. If InstaDeep was successful the way it is, it's also thanks to strong support by tech giants willing to see young startups emerge. And so we need everybody in the ecosystem, and this is possible today. So a bit more knowledge and awareness from government is needed, and regulation is going to be necessary, but still keep the forces of the private sector, of startups, of entrepreneurship, driving the way, and I'm extraordinarily optimistic about the future.
Yeah, so what you're asking for there is kind of clarity, but a light touch, right?
Exactly.
Not too deep inside. How do I come to you in terms of this same topic, but just trying to understand, so much of I think Karim said something earlier about how Europe has kind of led the way on the sort of regulatory, almost all tech regulations. Are there any concerns that maybe the AU or any of these countries might try to just align their sort of process to be just like Europe's, or is it really necessary that each country and and the AU really has a very unique, like the example given there with Nigeria, has a really unique approach here with AI?
Yeah.
AI
Look,
policy, I should say.
I'm going to be a bit controversial here.
Try it.
It's good, it's good. That's why the people are here.
So, it's not for the love of your children that the milkman sells milk. So as an African-born company that has spent the last 30 years building infrastructure on the continent, we built 110,000 kilometers of fiber from Cape Town to Cairo, from Mombasa to Mwanda. If regulation had led technology, there would be no Pan-African terrestrial cable to speak about today. So I get very concerned when our governments try to lead innovation and the cut and paste of going to the EU because there is some donor funding that's available to develop some kind of a regulatory framework. If we had had that kind of a regulatory framework, there would be no mobile money in Africa.
Yeah, exactly.
We had to come up with pay-as-you-go in 1997, 1998, in order to solve what was distinctly an African problem, that you could not have a contract on a mobile phone. There was no address to send the contract to in the first place. It wasn't that people could, the people could not afford to make a phone call. No, they could afford to make a phone call, but using African ways of doing it and using African innovation. So, whilst I appreciate what my two colleagues here are willing to do for us as Africa, I think I would like to encourage them. You partner with Cassava, we speak African.
These are hardest views and hardest views alone. for any of our partner government officials, we love you. And please don't mind him.
Look, I'm happy to defer to those with self-interest. So, Alex, please.
Excellent. I mean, I get your point, and I think it's an important one. And the M-Pesa example, which I believe you were referring to there, is often the example given because, as we know, so many regulators, not just in Africa, but definitely around the world, have got in the way.
No.
To put it nicely,
look, I think
but there does need to be, as you said earlier, actually, some caution with this because this technology is so powerful.
I think it has to be a
we
partnership. I think our regulators honestly get a hard time. Adaora just explained to you, in Nigeria, in my country, they invited people and they sat down and they worked it out for over a period of time. That's progressive.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there's always going to be that risk of people worried about data flows, et cetera, and the sovereignty of data. But I truly believe that there's no way any of us can operate as innovators, as startups, as businesses without having those partnerships. I don't think it should be about, they should just have a light touch and get out the way. I do think that we need to have partnerships that are meaningful and also help regulators understand how this is done without it being a copycat situation between Europe and us. So that's my view, and that view is underpinned in the fact that there's no way that you thrive as any business in any country without having that partnership as a foundation.
Okay. On that excellent note, it's all kumbaya here. We love each other.
At least I love it.
Please join me in thanking an excellent panel for wonderful. Thanks a lot.